The iron gates of the Ravenna estate did not open for just anyone. They opened for delivery trucks that arrived on schedule and left without making eye contact. They opened for black SUVs carrying men in suits who never smiled. They opened twice a year for the priest Luca Ravenna paid generously to say nothing and ask even less. On a gray Tuesday morning in late October, they opened for Claire Bennett. She sat in the passenger seat of the agency van, a worn duffel bag on her lap, and her hands folded neatly on top of it. Not out of patience, but out of practice. Stillness was something Claire had learned the hard way. It cost less than movement. It attracted less attention. The van rolled up the long gravel driveway, past manicured hedges that had no business being that perfect, past a fountain that had been turned off for the season, past two men standing near the front steps who weren't gardeners, no matter what their jacket suggested. Claire noticed the earpieces. She noticed the way their eyes tracked the van without moving their heads. She said nothing. Mrs. Horton, the estate's head housekeeper, met her at the side entrance. Not the front door. Never the front door, she was told, and walked her through the house with the speed and efficiency of a woman who had given this tour too many times to pretend it was interesting. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms on the upper floor. The west wing is staff accessible. The east wing is not. Mrs. Horton paused just briefly at that last sentence, the way people pause when a word carries more weight than they're willing to explain. You will clean the main floors, the kitchen, the study on the ground level, and Mr. Ravenna's office, but only when he is not in it, and only when I tell you it's time. Understood, Claire said. Mrs. Horton looked at her then, really looked at her, as if searching for something she didn't find. Most new girls ask questions. About him, about the house, about the east wing. Claire just nodded, tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, and waited for the rest of the instructions. She got the job done. That was what the agency had said, and it was true. In the 3 weeks that followed, Claire moved to the Ravenna estate like water finding its level, quiet, consistent, filling the spaces without disturbing them. She polished the mahogany banisters until they gleamed. She laundered and pressed the household linens with precision that made Mrs. Horton raise an eyebrow but say nothing. She learned which floorboards creaked and stepped around them without being told. Luca Ravenna, for his part, was rarely visible. He existed in the estate the way a low-pressure system exists in weather. You didn't see it, but you felt the weight of it in everything. Conversations dropped half a degree when he entered a room. The men who worked for him stood differently, moved differently, breathed differently in his presence. He was tall, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, not handsome in any soft sense of the word, but striking the way a storm is striking, something you looked at and immediately understood the danger of. Claire had been warned before she arrived. A girl at the agency, one who had lasted 3 days at the estate before asking to be reassigned, had grabbed Claire's arm in the break room and said quietly, "Don't look at him directly. Don't speak unless he speaks first. And whatever you do, don't let him see that you're scared." Claire had listened politely and thought, "I've survived worse than a man with money." She wasn't sure she still believed that, but she held on to it anyway. On her 5th day, she saw him properly for the first time. She was coming out of the study with a caddy of cleaning supplies when he appeared at the far end of the corridor, phone to his ear, jaw tight, moving with the kind of purpose that parted rooms. He glanced at her. 1 second, maybe less. A flat, assessing look that registered her and filed her away. Then he was gone, turning the corner, his voice dropping into Italian she couldn't follow. She let out a slow breath and kept walking. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Luca Ravenna had noticed more than she thought. He noticed that she hadn't frozen, hadn't smiled nervously or averted her eyes with the guilty haste of someone trying to seem invisible. She had simply looked back at him with the calm, steady composure of someone who had learned to carry themselves like a closed door. He found that interesting. More interesting still, she avoided the east wing without being reminded, not with obvious unease, not with the exaggerated detour of someone trying to seem like they weren't avoiding something. Just a natural, wordless rerouting, the same way a person who's been burned once learns to walk around fire without thinking about it. Luca watched this from the upstairs landing one afternoon, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his eyes following her path through the corridor below. She turned left at the junction without hesitation, didn't even glance toward the east wing door. He didn't know her story yet, but he recognized the shape of it. He had seen that kind of learned avoidance before, in men who had survived things they never spoke of, in himself. If he was honest, on the rare occasions he allowed honesty near him. He took a sip of his bourbon and walked away from the landing. He told himself he wasn't curious. He was lying. The house was different at night. During the day, the Ravenna estate operated like a machine, purposeful, precise, every person and object in their correct position. But after midnight, when the guards had rotated to their outdoor posts and Mrs. Horton had retired to her room at the end of the staff corridor, the house exhaled. The silence settled in like a presence of its own, thick and complete, the kind of silence that made every small sound enormous. Claire knew this because she couldn't sleep. She hadn't slept well in 2 years. Not since Memphis. Not since the night she'd packed a single bag in the dark while Marcus slept, her hands shaking so badly she'd dropped her keys twice on the way to the door. Sleep, in her experience, had become a dangerous thing, a state of vulnerability she couldn't quite afford, even now, even here, even when the rational part of her brain whispered that she was safe. So at 2 a.m, she did what she always did when the ceiling of her small staff room became too close. She went to the kitchen. She didn't turn on the main lights, just the one above the stove, a warm, low glow that made the large kitchen feel almost human. She put the kettle on, even though she'd switched to coffee since coming to Chicago because the estate's coffee was remarkable and she allowed herself small pleasures when she could. She stood at the counter and stared at nothing while the kettle began its slow build to boiling. And then, without warning, without even fully understanding it was coming, she started to cry. It wasn't dramatic. Claire had never been a dramatic crier. It was quiet, the kind that crept up on you, a tightness in the chest, a sting behind the eyes, and then tears sliding down her face before she had time to decide whether to allow them. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, her shoulders curved inward. She breathed carefully through her nose, the way she trained herself to, so that the sound wouldn't carry. She was thinking about her mother. She was thinking about the apartment in Memphis she would never go back to. She was thinking about the particular loneliness of being somewhere safe and still not feeling it. She didn't hear him come in. Luca Ravenna moved away large. Dangerous things move, with a quietness disproportionate to their size. He had come down for water, the same as most nights, the same circuit. He walked when the thoughts that lived in the small hours got too loud. He pushed open the kitchen door, saw the light above the stove, and stopped. Claire had her back to him. Her shoulders were shaking slightly. The kettle was beginning to whistle softly. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Most men in his position would have retreated. Quietly, efficiently, no acknowledgement, no inconvenience to either party. That was the practical thing, the clean thing, the thing that maintained the correct distance between employer and staff, between his world and hers. Luca reached over and lifted the kettle off the burner before the whistle could build. Claire spun around. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the low-lit kitchen, she with tears still wet on her face, one hand flying up instinctively to wipe them away. He with the kettle still in his hand, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Not cold, not uncomfortable, just still. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, her voice tighter than she would have liked. "I didn't think anyone was. I'll go." "The coffee's already made," Luca said. She blinked. The small machine on the counter, she hadn't even registered it, had finished its cycle. He set the kettle down and reached for a mug from the cabinet above. He set it on the counter in front of her. She didn't move. He leaned back against the counter across from her, crossed his arms, and looked at her, not the way he usually looked at people in this house. Cataloging, assessing, calculating. Something different. Something quieter. "Who hurt you?" he said. "And are they still breathing?" The words landed in the kitchen, like stones dropped into still water. Claire stared at him, her mouth opened slightly. She had prepared in the back of her mind for a dozen possible reactions from this man. Impatience, dismissal, a clipped instruction to pull herself together. She had not prepared for this. No one in her life, no one, had ever asked her that question. Not with that directness. Not with that particular quality in their voice that was neither soft nor hard, but something in between that she didn't have a word for yet. She started. You don't have to answer, he said. I'm asking, not requiring. The distinction hit her somewhere behind the sternum. She picked up the mug of coffee with both hands and looked down at it. He's alive, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Back in Memphis. Luca said nothing for a moment. When she finally looked up, his jaw had shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening, controlled and brief. Memphis is a long way from here, he said. That was the point, she admitted. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he pushed off from the counter, walked to the door, and paused with his hand on the frame. Drink your coffee, he said, without turning around. You're safe in this house. He was gone before she could respond. Claire stood alone in the kitchen for a long time, both hands wrapped around the warm mug, the tears on her face already drying. She didn't know what to do with what had just happened. She didn't know what to do with the way his words had settled into her chest like something she hadn't realized she'd been waiting to hear. She drank her coffee. She went back to bed. For the first time in 2 years. She slept. You didn't think he'd say that, did you? Neither did Claire. Subscribe to Nikoye's story so you don't miss what happens next. It only gets deeper from here. The next morning, Claire found a cup of coffee waiting on the kitchen counter. Not the communal pot Mrs. Horton brewed for the staff at 7. This was a good coffee. The dark roast from the Italian press that sat on far end of the counter. The one Claire had learned was Luca's, the one she had never touched. It was poured still hot in a clean white mug. Next to it, a small folded note in handwriting that was sharp and economical, like the man himself. Shift starts at 9 today, not 8. That was all. No signature. None was needed. Claire stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the mug. Then she picked it up, took a slow sip, and felt the warmth move through her like a question she didn't have an answer to yet. Over the following 2 weeks, the gestures continued. Always small, always wordless, always deniable. The heavy window on the second floor that had been sticking for days was fixed overnight without explanation. The cleaning caddy she used was reorganized, so the heaviest bottles were no longer on the top shelf. One morning she arrived to find that 3 tasks had been quietly removed from her weekly list and reassigned, without ceremony, to another member of staff. She said nothing about any of it. Neither did he, but Claire noticed. And because she was a woman who had spent years learning to read the spaces between what people did and what they meant, she turned each small thing over in her mind carefully, the way a jeweler turns a stone to check its weight before trusting it. Kindness in this house always comes with a price. That was what she told herself. She had believed it in every house she'd worked in. She had believed it in Memphis, right up until she'd stopped believing anything Marcus told her. She had rebuilt herself on the principle that warmth, offered without explanation, was a currency someone intended to collect on eventually. It kept her careful. It kept her standing. But Luca never collected. He barely spoke to her. In the rare moments they occupied the same space, he gave nothing but a nod, brief, impersonal, the acknowledgement of one person to another who existed in the same orbit. No lingering, no watching, no favors performed with an audience to witness them. That, more than anything, unnerved her. She was 2 weeks deep into this quiet, confusing equilibrium when Enzo DeMarco walked into the kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon and made it clear that not everyone in the Ravenna estate was comfortable with the new arrangement. Enzo was Luca's enforcer, a wide, dark-eyed man in his late 30s who wore his loyalty to Luca the way other men wore wedding rings. He poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and looked at Claire with the measured, unhurried assessment of someone who considered looking at people of professional skill. "You're the new girl," he said. Not a question. "Claire," she said, and kept scrubbing the stovetop. "You've been here 3 weeks. 22 days. A pause. Something shifted in his expression, not hostility, exactly. More like recalibration. "You're good at this job." "Thank you." "That's not a compliment," he said, and set his glass down. "It means you're comfortable. Comfortable people get curious. Curious people in this house." He paused meaningfully. "They don't last." Claire set down her sponge, turned, and looked at him. "I'm not curious," she said. I'm employed. There's a difference. He studied her. He moved your shift this morning. I notice. He doesn't do that. Not for staff. Then maybe he had a reason that had nothing to do with me, she said simply, and turned back to the stove. Enzo left without another word. But that evening, she heard him to the half-open door of Luca's study. Low, careful, deliberate. She's been here less than a month. You don't know her story. And Luca's voice quieter, final. I know enough. What he knew. What he had pieced together from the careful, unhurried observation that was second nature to him, was more than Claire realized. He had noticed the way she angled herself near exits in unfamiliar rooms, the way she registered every new face that entered the house before allowing herself to relax, the way she had learned every guard's rotation within her first week, not from nosiness, but from the deeply embedded need to know where the danger was at all times. He recognized it because he had built the same architecture inside himself a long time ago, for different reasons. That evening, he found her in the hallway outside the library, returning a cleaning caddy to the supply closet. He stopped. She looked up. You're from Memphis, he said. Yes. A pause. I'm from the South Side, he said. Before all of this, a slight gesture that encompassed the house, the estate, everything that came with his name. My mother worked 2 jobs to pay rent on a place half the size of this kitchen. Claire was very still. It was the most personal thing she had ever heard him say. The most personal thing, she suspected, he had said to anyone in a very long time. It sat between them like something fragile. Why are you telling me that? She asked, carefully. Luca held her gaze for a moment. Because you looked like you needed to know that this house wasn't always what it is, he said. And neither was I. He walked away. Claire stood in the hallway for a long time, her hand resting on the supply closet door, her heart doing something slow and inconvenient in her chest. Down the hall, behind the closed door of his study, Enzo was already making calls. The Caruso outfit, the Ravenna family's oldest rival on Chicago's West Side, had been watching the estate for weeks. They had identified a new variable, a woman, unknown origin, unusual access. They had decided she was worth using. Claire didn't know any of this yet. She found out on a Thursday. It was the blood that did it. Not metaphorical, not implied, but actual, dark and real, on the sleeve of the man Enzo half carried to his side entrance at 10 o'clock in the morning while Claire was mopping the hallway floor. She pressed herself against the wall. Enzo met her eyes and said, without stopping, "Go to your room." She didn't. She followed at a distance. Through the half-open door of the room, they called the back office, a room she had always assumed was for paperwork. She saw things that paperwork did not explain. A man on a table, grimacing. 2 others she had seen before, but never been introduced to, moving with the focused efficiency of people who knew what to do with a bullet wound. Luca at the far end of the room, jacket off, sleeves rolled, giving instructions in a voice so stripped of emotion it barely sounded like language. Claire stood in the doorway. Luca looked up and saw her. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. Then he straightened, crossed the room in a few strides, and pulled the door shut behind him, gently but completely, leaving them both in the hallway. He looked at her, whatever he searched for in her face. He seemed to find it, because he didn't offer an explanation. He just said, "Are you all right?" She almost laughed. "Are you?" "I'm fine." A pause. "He'll be fine." "What?" She stopped, took a breath. "What is this house, Luca?" It was the first time she'd used his name. She hadn't planned it. It came out of the unsteadiness of the moment, of standing in a quiet hallway while somewhere behind a closed door a man was being stitched back together. Something moved through his expression, not discomfort. Something more complicated. "You know what it is," he said quietly. She did. She had known. In a half-considered way, you know things you decided not to look at directly. But knowing and seeing were not the same thing. "I should leave," she said. "Yes," he said. "You should." She looked at him. He was standing close. Not inappropriately, but close enough that she could see the tension in the line of his jaw, the careful containment of a man holding something very tightly. "But," she said, "but there's a car outside that doesn't belong here," he said, his voice low and even. "It's been there since yesterday." And the two men inside it are not interested in the house. He held her gaze. They're interested in you. The cold moved through her before she understood why. Me? Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. You were seen. That night in the kitchen. We have a camera blind spot there, which I was already aware of, but someone on the Caruso side has better information than I'd like. His jaw tightened. They think you're significant, that you know something. I don't know anything. I know that. A pause. They don't. She stared at him. So what do I do? You don't go anywhere alone, he said. You don't open the gate for anyone you don't recognize. And you don't, he stopped. Something shifted in his face, a brief, involuntary opening, like a window catch releasing. You don't leave this house tonight. She noticed he hadn't said you shouldn't. He had said you don't. Not a suggestion. Not an order exactly. Something else. Something that lived in the narrow space between protection and confession. And tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow I'll have handled it. She believed him. That was the thing that frightened her most. Not the car outside, not the men in it, not the blood on a sleeve in a back office room. What frightened her was how completely and immediately she believed him. How? Standing in this hallway in this house full of things she didn't understand and couldn't excuse, she felt, for the first time since Memphis, like nothing could reach her. That night, they came anyway. 2 cars, not one. The gate alarm tripped at 11:47. Claire was in her room, awake, dressed, because some part of her had known. She heard the low, controlled commotion, men moving fast, doors, voices she didn't recognize and then cut off. She heard Luca's voice once, brief and absolute, then silence, then footsteps in the hallway, and a knock. She opened the door. Luca stood there, jacket on, a mark along his jaw that would be a bruise by morning. He looked at her face, then looked past her into the room, checking, assessing. The habit of a man who protected things. It's done, he said. She stepped forward, out of the room, and without planning it, without thinking, she pressed her palm flat against his chest. Just for a moment, just to feel that he was solid and standing in there. His hand covered hers. Briefly, entirely. You're safe, he said, in the same voice he'd used in the kitchen on that first night. You're safe in this house. But this time it sounded different. It sounded less like a fact and more like a promise. She looked up at him and understood, with the quiet, certain clarity of someone who has spent enough time around dangerous things to know when one of them has changed, that she wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Maybe not at all. She's standing at the edge of everything. If you're feeling this story, share it, and make sure you subscribe to Nikoye Stories for the ending you won't see coming. November settled over Lake Forest like a hell breath. The Ravenna estate, always quiet, became quieter still, the particular quiet of aftermath of a house that had been tested and had held. The guards changed rotation. 2 men Enzo had trusted turned out not to be trustworthy, and they were gone with a kind of swift, permanent efficiency that Luca never discussed and Claire knew better than to ask about. The car outside the gate did not return. Life resumed its shape. Or rather, it resumed a shape, a new one, subtly different from what had come before, the way a room feels different after furniture has been moved even slightly. Claire still cleaned the main floors, the study, the ground-level rooms. She still moved through the house with her practiced quietness. But something had changed in the architecture of the place, or in her relationship to it. She knew now what the back office was used for. She knew the cost of the safety the walls provided. She had decided, in the long, clear light of the morning after, that she could live with what she knew. That itself was a decision she was still examining. Luca, for his part, was different in small ways that she suspected no one else in the house noticed. He nodded at her in the corridor now, rather than past her. Once, coming out of the study, he held the door for her. It was nothing, a habit of a moment, but it was not nothing to her. They talked occasionally. Brief, careful conversations about the house, about the weather turning, about coffee, once about Chicago winters and how to survive them if you'd grown up somewhere warmer. She had laughed at something he said, genuinely, and the look on his face afterward told her it was a sound he hadn't expected and didn't know what to do with. She caught him watching her sometimes. Not the way men had watched her in the past, not with the calculating weight of someone assessing what they could take. More like the way a person watches a fire, not to own it, just to be near the warmth. Enzo had stopped warning her. She wasn't sure if that was approval or resignation, and she decided it didn't matter much either way. 3 weeks after the night with the cars, on a Tuesday in the second week of November, Claire woke at 2 a.m, not from anxiety this time, not from particular cold sweat wakefulness of bad memories reasserting themselves. She woke simply because she was awake, which was different, and lay in the dark for a while listening to the house breathe. Then she got up, pulled her cardigan around her, and went to the kitchen. She turned on the light above the stove. She started the coffee. She stood at the counter, the same counter as that first night, and looked out at the dark garden, the first frost beginning on the lawn, the bare trees standing still in the cold. And she felt, cautiously and with full awareness of how strange it was, something she had not felt in longer than she could accurately remember. Still, not numb, still. There was a difference. One was absence. The other was presence. She didn't hear him come in. She didn't need to. "You're not crying," he said from the doorway. She looked over her shoulder. He was there, the same as that first night, same doorway, same way of filling a space without crowding it, dressed in dark clothes, barefoot on the tile. The bruise on his jaw had faded to almost nothing. "No," she agreed. "I'm not." He came in, reached for the second mug, her mug now, the one she always used, and poured. He handed it to her and poured his own. They stood on opposite sides of the counter, both looking out at the frost-silver garden. A long, easy silence passed between them, the kind of silence that used to make her tense and no longer did. Then he said quietly, "Who hurt you, and are they still breathing?" The same words. The exact same words as that first night, 6 weeks ago, in the same kitchen, under the same low stove light. But Claire heard the difference immediately, the way you hear a song you've heard 100 times and suddenly understand the lyric. Before, it had been a question about the past, about Memphis, about a man with dark eyes and a raised voice and hands that didn't know restraint. Now it was a question about something else entirely, about the year that had brought her here, about the ways a person could be hurt that left no visible mark, about whether she was still carrying something that had stopped belonging to her, whether she was ready to set it down. She turned and looked at him. He was watching her steadily, his coffee mug held in both hands, nothing hidden in his face. This man who had everything from everyone, who had built walls of silence and money and fear between himself and the world. He was looking at her with the quiet openness of someone who had decided, against all his better judgment, to ask. "I think," Claire said slowly, "the person who hurt me is in Memphis, and I don't live there anymore." Something settled in his expression, something that had been held carefully a long time, setting down. "And the other one?" he asked. "Lower now, more careful." She understood. She looked at him for a long moment. This complicated, dangerous, quietly broken man standing in his own kitchen in bare feet at 2 a.m, asking her, in the only way he knew how, if she was going to let what was between them matter. "I don't think she's been hurt yet," Claire said. "She's just been afraid." He set his mug down, reached across the counter, slowly, giving her every moment to step back, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His thumb rested against her cheek for just a second, then stopped being afraid. He said quietly, "Outside, Chicago winter pressed against the windows. The frost thickened on the garden lawn. Inside the kitchen, the light above the stove burned its same small, warm circle. Enough to see by, not enough to see everything, which was maybe how it had to be at the beginning of something real." Claire reached up and covered his hand with hers. Neither of them ran. Some people find safety in castles. Some find it in the most unlikely person in the room. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to Nikoye Stories for more stories that go straight to the heart.